Welcome to Dreamcatchers Episode 6. I'm Lex Napa here with Seantel Trombley, architecture student at Wentworth Institute of Technology and poet. So thank you for coming on the show and making the trip up to talk with me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here. I'm very excited.
Cool. So I'd just love to hear about your background as a student leader and a poet, whichever you feel like talking about most.
Jeez, they kind of go hand in hand. When I first went to the school, I don't know, I feel like I did that very classic thing where I went to college and everything in my life changed. It was like I thought I was one person and then I went and everything just totally blew up. And I think, well, it was interesting because Wentworth is such a small school and it's very, I don't know, oriented in what it is that it's doing because it's a technology school, so it's not like a liberal arts or anything. But the fact that it's in Boston and surrounded by so many colleges that are like super different in what it is that they're focusing on, I was still exposed immediately to so many different cultures and like lifestyles and like the LGBT community and poetry. And I started working at Pavement Coffee House. So I was like instantly exposed to so many different kinds of people and things. And it almost immediately changed like everything about who I am. And because I met so many people right off the bat when I moved to Boston, I found this friend of mine, her name's Rachel. She started this group on my campus called WILD, which is Women's Institute for Leadership Development. And it was a very baby group. Like she started it on her own and it was all about giving women on our campus like an opportunity to be able to be heard and like have a safe space to like talk about whatever it is that they wanted to talk about because of the fact that the school is 18% women. So it's really hard to find those areas. And so I became really dedicated to that. And like since I became a part of that group, I've like right after Rachel, I took the position as being the president. And since then, WILD has just grown significantly. And that's become a huge part of who I am. Yeah. And it was because of that group that I started putting on poetry nights to like raise money for it. And that's what really got me into poetry. So they sort of go hand in hand with one another.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
So tell us more about WILD and what that's all about for you.
So WILD, I love it so much. It's like my whole life. The most amazing thing that's in it is because of the fact that I said Wentworth is so small. And though they like really do care about like everyone who goes to school, like not just men, it's just hard to find those outlets because the ratio is so significantly different. And that's only, you know, you can't do anything about it. It's just like what happens. And so, but finding those outlets for like people who are LGBT, people from different like cultures and nationalities and like genders, like anything at all, finding those safe spaces to be able to come together and talk and just feel free to like question things or the way that you're being treated or like talk about things that bothered you that day. Like nobody, it feels a lot of times that in society, like nobody really wants to hear you complain. And so this is one of those, it's not just a group to come together and complain, but like more like a group to come together, like pose an issue and then talk about how we're going to overcome it and not let it destroy us. Because I think a lot of times like comparison and the boundaries or the box that a lot of life tries to put you in, especially dealing with society, is really hard to break out of because you feel so alone in that battle. And so WILD was originally created to pretty much like help one another be motivated to break out of that box. Right. And like continue to try to like push to be yourself because it gets really hard a lot of the time.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
And it's really difficult for me to imagine, just frankly, as someone who came from a psychology background, you know, in school being surrounded by 70 to 80% women. Yeah. It's hard for me to picture what it's like being on a campus where only 18% of the population are women and even fewer are queer women. So what's that like? What are some of the challenges you face with that?
That's one of the craziest things too, is that like not only do I feel like I'm a voice for like women on campus, but I also feel even more so that I'm a voice for queer women on campus, especially because of the fact that I consider myself to be looking like pretty androgynous and whatever. You know, just like walking around, I take a lot of pride in the fact that I am who I am. But there, you know, it was not an easy path. I don't think it's any path of life is necessarily like super easy, but I'm proud of like what I've been through to get where I am. And I know that especially on campus, all of the experiences that I've been through that more like molded me to be the way that I am are awesome, but definitely weren't easy. And a lot of that process involved a lot of me feeling alone a lot of the time. And when while I'm going through the process of overcoming it, I'm not like totally set now, but
who is?
Yeah, honestly, I was like, it's a constant process.
Yeah.
But as I was figuring out that it's sort of like a process that's never ending, I really am thankful for the people that I had surrounding me. And I wanted to make it a goal to be able to provide that safe space or motivation to other people on our campus who are going through that same exact thing. But then it's not just the people on our campus either. That's why I created like my YouTube channel, because I wanted to be able to reach out and talk to anybody who might like need that helping hand and support. It's just not even like, I don't know what to do, but I could just, sometimes you just need a friend or someone or anyone to tell you that like whatever it is that you're doing is okay. Like it's not the wrong thing. Like any direction it is that you're going is the right direction. And sometimes those easy but so clear realizations are so hard to embrace on your own. And sometimes you just need somebody else like repeating the things that you already know. Right. To like get you to have that aha moment.
Or even just to talk to somebody else and to hear your own words being reflected across to someone who is like you in some way. That's a really powerful thing. Yeah, and honestly, even just within this last year was the first time that I made some of the best friends that I think I will have forever. And it was finding that like queer community that honestly, not a lot of it comes from my campus, which doesn't mean that it's not existent on my campus, but it wasn't just like, you can't just focus on one area and like blind yourself to like this one area of living. Like I reached out and I have friends from Suffolk and like MCP and Simmons and Mass Art and like everybody who like comes together from like different, that you meet just like at bars or events or anything, and like randomly coming together and forming this like really amazing group of people and that's what saved me in a sense, is having that safe group. And I'm really lucky that I found it outside of school, but that's really hard, I think, for a lot of people to find. I'm really lucky in the fact that I'm pretty extroverted and I'm willing to like put myself out there, but that's really tough for a lot of people. And so the fact that I could create something on our campus that the school is willing to promote, and then, and it's like right next to the dorm halls, so it's easy for like freshmen or whatever to like walk right over and join a group. It kind of brings that environment like closer to home in a sense. So I think it makes it a lot less intimidating than for people to just like show up at my friend's house and be like, hey, I want to be your friend. The fact that it's school based, it's like we're still, it's the same thing. It's just like a different kind of environment. Right. So it sounds like you've got all of these different like really great pockets of community, like on campus and then off campus in connection with all the other schools around, because like Boston is the cornucopia of colleges. Really. So
there's so many.
You've been able to form community there, and you're also branching out on YouTube to be able to expand that circle of community even further to just kind of people on the internet who are interested in poetry, who are looking for advice. You kind of do it all there.
Yeah, it's been so interesting, especially because I went on study abroad recently, and so I went away to Germany for 3 months, and I lived in Germany. I went to like Iceland and England and everything, and it was really funny because I have a blog that I put all my poetry on, and someone who happened to follow me on my blog that lives in Germany, it was like so odd because I was like, wow, we're so close to each other randomly. Like I had no idea that she was from Germany, and then I just so happened to be in Germany. And then out of nowhere too, someone else contacted me, and they apparently live in Boston, and I had no idea, and now they go to some of the poetry nights that I put on once a month. And it was just like so interesting to be able to see like people that I've met through my poetry on the internet, to be able to meet in person and like become a part of something that my group from school does. And having these two different worlds like collide in such a beautiful way was so interesting.
Yeah, you're like the thread of connection that runs through these otherwise completely separate experiences.
Yeah, and it's so amazing to like see, like have one of those moments where I was aware of my effect on like a greater thing. Like it's a weird realization to like have that moment of being like, this is sort of why I'm here. It's like for these little connections, like this is why everything is worth it. Right. Because that realization I think can get lost sometimes when life gets too overwhelming. But then when you find these like little moments of like, that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't here, reminds me of like why it is that I do what I do.
Right. You're leaving your fingerprint on the world in meaningful ways.
Yeah. And it's so rewarding. Yeah. It's so rewarding in so many different little ways.
So how did you get involved with poetry? I know you said kind of through Wild, but is that something that you kind of brought with you from childhood, or is it something that's relatively new? Like, how did you get started in all that?
Yeah, so it was actually about like 2 years ago, maybe more, a little bit more, but I was just, I was on co-op in this area in Davis Square, and I would take the train all the time, every single day, and I was dating somebody, and it was the first time that I was like really in love. Like I was like so obsessed with like everything about her, and for the first time ever, I was just like, I needed to get it out, and I didn't know how, and I needed to word to her or myself or anything, like how it is that I felt and like the meaning. And for me, it is so easy. You know how sometimes people will have a feeling inside of them and they'll draw it through like a picture, or they'll see it through like colors or whatever. Like for me, it's like metaphors and wording, and I don't know how to describe exactly how it is that I'm feeling, but I can try to relate it to another experience. And so I started creating these different metaphors of like feeling to convey to her or anyone where this like deep passion in me was coming from, in a sense. And as I was writing the metaphors, they sort of started to string together, and then people were like, that sounds pretty cool, like you should read that out loud. And I was like, no, that's dumb. and then I did, and it felt amazing. And what happened was I read it at one of the events that I put on, one of the poetry nights, and someone like came up to me after, and they were like, I would love to have that written. Can you write down one of the lines from your poem? Because I want to. It was like so great, and I connected with it so well. And I was like, that is the coolest feeling, for someone to come up to you and be like, I really like what you said, to the point where I want to be able to read it all the time. Yeah. And I was like, how can I provide that even more so? And I was like, maybe I'll make a blog and I'll put my poetry on there. And then as that started to grow, it was a similar thing. Like I wanted to be able to, I realized that a lot of my poetry, a lot of it has to do with the execution and the way that I say it and speak it and yell it or not, and the melody that goes with it. Yeah. And you can't really get that through just reading it online. And so I wanted to create the YouTube channel so that people would be able to like see and hear me reading about things that I'm super passionate about, because it's a lot more than just the words itself, which is almost why I needed the metaphors and needed the poetry, because just saying I love you is not enough in a lot of senses. Right. You know, it's a lot more than the words that you're saying. It's the meaning behind what it is that you're saying. Yeah. It's a lot heavier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know if you've heard of Robert Pinksy. He's a poet, and he wrote a book, The Sounds of Poetry, just talking about how important it is like to hear poetry being spoken more than just like on the page. So you're really kind of putting yourself out there on YouTube and like reading your poetry. And, you know, I've been to a couple like open mic poetry nights, and there's nothing more mortifying as an introvert getting up on stage reading a very personal poem. So like, how do you muster the courage to do that regularly?
So I became addicted, I guess, in a sense of, you know, when you get in those deep conversations with people and it's like one-on-one, and you have those moments where you're like, this is much more than just a surface level conversation. Like you're almost seeing into someone's soul. Yeah. And when I am able in a conversation to get people to like take their guard down like that, it is one of the most like beautiful things I've ever witnessed in my life. Like that's, having that ability to connect with someone is so amazing. And a lot of times I've realized that you can't get somebody to let their guard down unless you are willing to do the same. And I feel like people are almost more willing to share with me easily their true authentic self if I'm willing to show them that of me. And I am willing. I know how hard it is. I've been there, and I've like felt the pain of having really terrible self-esteem and like hating yourself and like going through really bad mental health issues. And it's so hard to come through that. But when you do, it's almost like, there's this metaphor I heard once. This is sort of, I always speak in metaphors, but it's sort of like the bird never hates the egg for being an egg because it was there once, and they know how hard it is to break out of the shell. And so they just want to encourage the egg to continue to break out, but they don't hate it for being an egg still. And so for me, it's like, I'm so proud of myself for overcoming everything that I've overcome. And I want to be able to show people like almost how great it can be to be, I don't know, like proud of yourself. Not just like happy, but like proud of yourself for making it this far, you know? And like looking back and being okay with like the steps of life that you've taken and feeling strong that you've made it this far. And so I try to like push or portray that through my poetry. And I find that oftentimes a lot of people will like hear that and see that and be inspired by that. And I feel like it's almost it's having those deep conversations, but without having the conversation. It's like you're still able to make that connection without having the full in-depth conversation that you can like dedicate hours of your life to.
Right.
Because with people who live in Germany or who live in other countries, I don't know, and or even down the street, someone that you're not even able to connect with that much or see that often, like you're still able to have those connections and understanding of like these very similar feelings and experiences in life that connect us. Like you're still able to embrace that,
right?
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely does, because there's a whole ocean of things that people don't talk about day to day, and having the courage and the vulnerability to put yourself out there and at least show like a couple of waves of what you're experiencing inspires somebody else to let their guard down and do the same. And that's really what we need in the world to build community and to make this a world that we all feel is worth living in. So
because I think a lot of times too, it has nothing to deal with the specifics of the situation. You know, like I don't write a poem saying like I loved someone and they broke up with me and now I'm sad about it, you know, because I used to love them. It's like a lot less about like what I was saying earlier, the exact words that you're saying to describe an experience, but the feeling behind it, because everybody can relate to feelings more than they can experience. Like I don't know what you've been through in your life, but I know that you've probably been sad before. Right. So if I want to write about being sad, like we could talk about being sad without the actual descriptions of like what it is that made us sad. That's just like experience in life, which is what makes us different as people.
But the emotions make us similar.
And so there's another thing that I heard once. It was I went away to this retreat once, and my mom sent me away. It was at Kripalu. It's in upstate Massachusetts. It's like this yoga center. And there's this thing that I did. It was called Quarter Life Calling, which I highly recommend to anybody who wants to do it. It absolutely changed my life and saved my life for, you know, if I'm going to be totally honest, it picked me up from like a place that I never thought I was going to be able to get up from. And totally changed my perspective on my life and how I look at and view myself. And one of the things, and especially my relationship with people, and one of the things that she said while I was there was, I'm nothing like you, I'm something like you, I'm nothing but you. Because if you break it down, we both have like stomachs and livers and hearts and hair and all this stuff. So we're like almost exactly the same. And then our feelings make us similar. Like we can relate on our experiences. But then because of just every walk of life that I've been through and you, it's like we are at the end of the day like two totally different people. We look totally different. But then we also have all of these commonalities between us. And being able to remember and remind yourself that yes, differences exist, but we all ultimately, I think, are trying to just like come together on these like basic foundations of like we all just really want to be happy and enjoy ourselves and like be proud of ourselves and like have a fulfilling life. And you know, we want to be successful, whatever it is that means. And you know, it doesn't, but how those are implemented are different depending on the people. But these ultimate goals are like something that we all want to achieve. And that sounds so easy and basic, and like when someone says it, you're like, yeah, duh. But at the same time, a lot of society and what it is that we see constantly day to day goes against those like basic morals in a sense. And I feel like we can get lost, which is why the women's group is so incredible, because that's a place where we can remind each other like, oh, you want to do that? That's okay. Like you can't, like, no, if that made you feel weird, like that's okay. You can feel weird because of that. Like, I always hate it whenever anybody says like, I'm sorry, but I feel so bad about blah, blah, blah. Because I'm like, don't apologize for, like, being affected by something. Like, never apologize for feeling, because that's not a thing that you chose to do. It's just a thing that happens, you know? Like, be sorry that you, like, punched me in the face, but don't be sorry that you, like, had a feeling. I don't know. That has nothing to do with me. Like, you feeling something has nothing to do with, like, my life. You know, that's an internal thing, you know? And I don't like it when people apologize. Or I don't like that people feel the need to apologize for being a human, doing a very basic thing. That's like apologizing for being hungry.
Right. Well, it's putting weight on what's positive and what's negative. No one ever apologizes for being happy or joyful, but they apologize for feeling the, quote, negative emotions of anger and sadness and fear.
Yeah, as if we're not supposed to do that.
Right. But life is really about kind of the whole spectrum of emotion.
Exactly.
And kind of holding it all in an embrace.
Yeah, and that spectrum comes into play in so many things. And you generally hear the argument of it being with sexuality. It's like it's all a spectrum. And then like gender is a spectrum. Like feelings are a spectrum. Like good versus bad is a spectrum. It's never just black and white. It's never. And when you try to put those boundaries or the box around any of these expectations to come from us, that's when we start to feel anxiety and like fear and sadness, because you don't feel as though you're able to like check the box off on what you are. Because it's an amoeba. It's constantly changing. Even if I knew today, like I have no idea how I'm going to feel tomorrow, whether it's about me, how I feel, how I want to identify, who I want to be with, or like, you know, it's in constant flux. So to be able to define it to anybody is like impossible. It's absolutely impossible. And to expect anybody to be able to do that to you is also impossible. So I feel like I settled in within myself when I gave myself permission to mess up and to not know. You know, I'm like, I identify as a lesbian, but I give myself the permission to allow that to change at any moment. Like, I don't put myself in a box, even if I identify like, until further notice, you know, and it's the same way about so many other things. Like, I'm really happy right now, but you know, that doesn't mean that something might not also be bothering me. I don't know, but it's like these internal choices that I make within myself that allow me to not allow my day to be ruined because of whatever reason.
Yeah, the human brain's a very imperfect thing. So we like to put things in labels or put things in categories and boxes, even though we instinctively, maybe logically know that life is a spectrum. Nothing's ever just in one box or the other, but our brains tend to that, to do that automatically. And part of the challenge is to stop yourself when you start to do that and to acknowledge the spectrum and remember the spectrum. Because it's not something that comes, you know, first nature to a lot of people. Yeah.
And I think we find as we grow and experience life, you start to understand and notice how much literally everything is a spectrum and how little control you have over most things, pretty much everything. And I think that lack of control is very scary to a lot of people, and it's like very intimidating. So you look and cling to these little signs, whether it's people, identities, clothing, where you live. What is it that people want to get fixated on certain things to almost ground them and like hold them in a sense of being like, okay, like I'm okay because I have like this girlfriend or this boyfriend, or I'm okay because like I'm in school, or because I have this job. And it's like, well, what if that disappears one day? Then like, are you still going to be okay? Like, are you still okay within yourself? And that conversation, like being willing and able to stand on your own, is not something that I don't think a lot of people feel as though they can say they can do confidently. And so, and it's funny because I can even bring that, or I'm trying to bring that into architecture too when I go into my master's program next year, is I want to base my thesis around the idea of the home and why is it that we feel safe in a home, and what about the architecture around us that allows us to feel safe. So whether it's you can hear the wind outside, how depending on how thin the walls are, if you can hear the people next door, or what is it about the structure of a room that makes you feel safe? Because in those spaces that you consider your home, where you dwell, where you let your walls down, does the structure of the place around you give you that sense of grounding and comfort that allows you to then explore the other parts of your mind where you might find less comfort, you know? But it's all like depending on the space, those variables changing. It's like, okay, well now I feel safe in the space that I'm in, so I'm willing to explore my love life. And like my comfort within that. But it's like when you're with that person, then you're outside, there's no space around you, you might be in the snow, and then it's freezing, and that becomes your main concern, you know, is like that food hunger. There's like it's that level of
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes, that. it's like I can picture it.
Yep, we're trying to make the pyramid here.
And so it's like depending on where it is or what it is that you're surrounded by, whether it's people, places, things, where is it that your draw to comfort comes in? If it's like the space and need around you, whether it's food, or if it's relationships or your own sense of self, and why it is that people are drawn to some things versus other. Because there's some people who are no love, like no sense of self-awareness or anything, but they can live outside forever and be like totally cool. Like they do not need shelter. And like that's always so interesting for me, because like I need my bedroom. Like I need my like 4 walls that I can sit in and be quiet and just alone. But there's other things that I totally am cool living without, that like some people crave more than others. And that relationship is so interesting to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a really creative approach to architecture that you're taking. I think that's awesome.
Thank you.
And I'm wondering if there was anybody who kind of inspired you or guided you towards the path that you're on.
So there was a couple. There's never been one person that I totally found myself as, and I was like, I want to be like you. Because I feel in a sense that drove me into an ingenuine mindset, because I was taking on the identity of somebody else versus myself. But when I was younger, I had this dance teacher. Her name was Jen. She inspired me to tap. I really love tapping. And she made me feel like so confident in it for some reason. And it was nothing against any of the other dance teachers I had, but something about every part about the way that she acted and stood was like goofy with a sense of lightness, and like was living on a whim. And then we connected like these two different people through this one thing that we like to do, which was tapping. And for some reason, it felt so amazing whenever I was around her when I was younger. And then as I grew up, I mentioned I went to this retreat. So the woman who ran the retreat, Kobe Kozlowski, it's a very long last name, but she ran the retreat and became another sense of inspiration to me, because even though she is much different than I, and she's had a totally different life than I have, basically the retreat was, she was sort of presenting her morals and like what it is that she studied her whole entire life. And it wasn't that I liked the way that her life is because of those morals, but I liked how those morals drove her life and the way that she implemented them into her life. And so that inspired me to wanting to take a lot of the similar techniques and bring them into my life. So I'm still ultimately on a much different path than she is. Like, I didn't take her path by any means, but a lot of the things that inspired her, I was able to look at and morph and take to inspire me, which was amazing and like the greatest gift that anybody could have given me, probably.
Yeah.
And so it was just different ways that I was inspired by the way that people were living their lives, which was very different than society in a sense. And I was able to feel a lot more confident taking their inspirations and being like, okay, I'm going to reflect on myself now. Like, how am I going to stand out like they stood out?
Right.
And I think I was drawn more to their uniqueness than anything else. But it was still not like, I want to be you. It was like, I want to be me, and I want other people to look at me the way that I look at you. That's what I was drawn at.
Right.
And so I find that a lot through my poetry, which is really nice. And it's weird too, because as I write, and like I naturally have to like watch my own YouTube channel and to just see the videos and everything. And as I watch them, I love the fact that sometimes I even have moments where I'm like, yeah, that's why I'm still here. Like, I still get excited about my own thoughts.
Right.
And having that internal connection and relationship with myself in a weird sense is what continues to inspire me, which is weird. And I connect a lot with people who have nothing to do with poetry or architecture or design or women's leadership or whatever, but they have their own little passions that they have in their life that inspire them. And that is absolutely incredible. And they get stoked about my poetry when they see the kind of effect that it has on me. And being able to see like that internal, almost people like falling in love with themselves and like being happy about just themselves and something that they're creating.
Right.
You can notice it within different people and see how, I don't know, inspiring it is within themselves, because it becomes this like really beautiful uniqueness. Instead of wearing makeup or clothes, it's like they're identifying in a totally different way. Like, look at this super unique thing that's making me me. Mm-hmm. And that is insanely beautiful for the human, I don't know, identity, I guess.
No, I definitely agree.
Yeah.
So what would your advice be to anyone listening who might be kind of on the verge of discovering their passion and wanting to follow their dream?
It almost gets like scarier before it gets better. But to not stop. I mean, remind yourself why it is that you're doing what it is that you're doing. You know, a lot of people have told me in my past to every morning, wake up and start at the basics. Like, start writing down what it is that you're excited about today. And sometimes I've written it and I've only been like, I woke up. And that's the best thing that happened today, is the fact, like, I'm stoked I woke up. And, like, I'm stoked I can still breathe, and that I can walk, and that I can talk, and, like, I have all these really good things. And then I'm like, I start reminding myself of the bigger picture. Like, I have really cool clothes, and, like, I love my cat, and I write poetry, and I've done this, and I got invited to this event, and my school picked me for this, and I'm really lucky. And I remind myself like how unique, individual, and successful I am. Even if it is just a couple basic reminders, it can really remind you like why today is going to be the best day. You know, there's nothing preventing that from happening aside from you, I think.
Right.
You know, you can make that argument at least, is that like for me, even if it feels like it's going to be a terrible day and there's like nothing, you know, I can still choose to smile the most that I can. And sometimes that's like the little thing that you need to like stay motivated and stay positive. And if I truly believe that whatever it is that you put out, you get back. And so sometimes when it feels like everything is falling apart around me, I'll just be like, okay, well, I'm just gonna just keep trying to be happy and like positive, and then maybe it'll just reflect somehow.
Right.
And the universe, has like surprisingly done that. I get a lot of positive feedback just because I try my best at least to like not radiate negativity. And so for the most part, I get a lot of positive things out of what is originally seemingly a negative situation.
Yeah. So just kind of throwing out positive vibes into the universe and seeing what comes back. And oftentimes it comes back.
Yeah, and to not be discouraged if sometimes, someone's trying to push. I feel like a lot of people will force almost a negative thing onto you because, I don't know, their own issues or whatever. Mm-hmm. And to not allow that to break who it is that you are. Right. And especially right now with everything that's going on with everything.
Mm-hmm. Politically. It's okay to say that word on this podcast. It's coming up more and more.
Yeah, it's like inevitable. So, right. But with all of that, as crappy as it is, there's been so much positive outlash because of it. You've seen so many communities come together and do these marches and like have these speeches, and there's so many people who are inspired much more now to write and sing and create. And though there is, yes, a lot of negative things happening, I try my best to also not forget about all these positive things that are coming out of it as well. Right. Because a lot of people would not have that call to action, in a sense, to finally get up and like do something and be heard. Yeah. Or feel the need to actually want to speak now, And so that, I think, is, a beautiful thing that came from a negative situation. And I think in a lot of negative things that you find yourself in your life, you can find a way, even in the most simplest of terms, like to find a positive thing. And when you start to look for those positives, it becomes like second nature, even if it's in the most basic, the tiny things, like I tripped, but like I didn't hit the ground. Like, like I just tripped. Yeah. And so once you start practicing that in the really easy tasks in your life, it becomes a lot easier and like second nature to continue that inner dialogue when a lot more tougher and pressing situations come along, whether it's like heartbreak or your friends are fighting or the government doing everything that it's doing, and like in school, I don't know. And so there's so many much bigger issues, and when you look at all of the issues in your life, it becomes very overwhelming and you just kind of crash. Right. And so if you're constantly fixing those like tiny little microaggressions in your life, the bigger things become less intimidating when you are okay with everything else in your life, if that makes sense. Yeah,
definitely. So, wow, good deep talks. We got pretty far into it today. So thanks again so much for coming on the show and making your way out here. I really, really appreciate having you on.
I'm so happy I could make it.
To check out Seantel's YouTube channel, search Writing Our Makeup or search Seantel Trombley. This has been an episode of Dreamcatchers. Thanks for listening, and remember to always keep dreaming.